I was standing by the kitchen window when I saw a silver Honda slow down on the country road and then stop in front of our gate. I knew it. It was my sister, Vanessa. 3 years of silence, and here she was, standing on the edge of my yard, phone to her ear, sobbing so hard her shoulders shook. I watched him stare at the house. Our house. The house my husband Derek built with reclaimed wood and strong hands. The house my father said we could never afford. 3 years ago, he looked me straight in the eye and said the words that changed everything. Those words cost him the shop, his reputation in this town, and his 2 daughters. But what happened at the fundraiser? That's the part that's still the talk of Macon. Welcome back to our quiet drama. I'm Sarah, 32, an accountant who managed my family's accounts for free for 8 years. This is the story of what happened when they gave my sister $100,000 for her wedding and told me I wasn't worth a penny. If you've ever sacrificed yourself for people who didn't appreciate you, please share this comment. Leave a comment and subscribe. I grew up in Macon, Georgia, in a yellow wooden house 3 blocks from Main Street, where my father, Richard, ran Henderson's hardware store for 22 years. He opened it with money he borrowed from his parents when I was 10. My mother, Janet, quit her job as a nurse to run the store, and for 2 decades, it was everything to us. It was our source of income, our identity, and even our Sunday dinner conversations. I started keeping the books when I was 24, right after passing the CPA exam. My father's previous accountant had retired, and hiring a replacement would have cost $45,000 a year. I said, "I'll do it for free." I convinced myself it was temporary. That was 8 years ago. I balanced the accounts quarterly, filed tax returns, reconciled supplier invoices, and managed the payroll of 3 part-time employees. In my second year, I discovered a $14,000 invoice error with one of my lumber suppliers. I renegotiated their insurance policy, saving them $6,000 a year. No one threw a party. No one thanked me. The closest I came was when my father nodded at the quarterly report and said, "It looks good." My sister Vanessa was 3 years younger than me. She worked in a small shop on Mulberry Street, the kind of shop that sold candles and scarves imported from Portugal for $40. Vanessa was beautiful, charming, and photographically striking. She was the one whose picture appeared on the family Christmas card, the one my mother took to church lunch, the one whose engagement photo hung on the mantelpiece before the ring fitting. As for me, I had a filing cabinet in my spare room and a spreadsheet open on Christmas morning. I didn't blame Vanessa then. I blamed myself for thinking that if I kept my calculations accurate, the score would be settled between us in the end. Vanessa got engaged on a Saturday in April to Bradley Parker, 31, a sales manager at the Honda dealership on 41st Street. He drove a rented SUV and wore watches more expensive than my monthly rent. I didn't like Bradley. I didn't know him well enough to hate him. What I did know was that he was generous with tips, quick-witted, and had an opinion on everything except his spending habits. The engagement dinner was at my parents' house. Slow-cooked roast beef, Diana's fine china, and a bottle of champagne more expensive than the meat itself. Vanessa held out her hand for everyone to see. 2 carrots. Bradley smiled like he'd won something. My father cut the meat. My mother kept refilling Vanessa's glass. I sat at the end of the table, eating in silence. Vanessa began talking about the wedding. The venue was on Sinclair Lake, with 200 guests, a live band, and a custom-designed dress by an Atlanta-based stylist. The orchids were imported from Ecuador, Bradley said, as if discussing the price of a car. We expect it to cost around $80,000, maybe more with the extras. My parents exchanged glances. They weren't worried, they weren't nervous. There was something different, the look of people who had already made up their minds and were waiting for the right moment to announce it. I put down my fork, not because I doubted anything, but because the room had changed. The atmosphere was different. A silence more profound than words prevailed. It happens between people who know something you don't. I've read enough books to know when the numbers don't match. Something was coming. I just didn't know it was going to hit me. My father put down the chopping knife, wiped his hands with the cloth, and cleared his throat. "We've talked," he said, looking at my mother. Janet nodded. We're giving Vanessa $100,000 for her wedding. She deserves the best start. Silence fell over the table. $100,000? Not a loan? A gift? Vanessa exclaimed. Bradley shook my father's hand. Janet wept and hugged Vanessa. I sat there doing the calculations I couldn't stop. $100,000. That's more than double the annual profit of Henderson Tools. The amount was more than I had saved throughout my entire career. I had been paying it off for 2 years, for nothing. I opened my mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. I said, Derek and I have also talked about marriage. Not a big deal, maybe a small ceremony in. My father interrupted me. He looked me straight in the eye. Not far from me, not through me, mine alone. You don't deserve help, as you should have. He said it at the end of his speech. Then he continued, Derek doesn't have a real career. His family went bankrupt. I don't waste money on a mistake. No one backed down. Vanessa looked at her ring. Bradley sipped his champagne. Janet folded her napkin into a perfect rectangle and didn't say a word. I picked up the fork, then put it down. I stood up and said, okay, nothing else. I took the plate to the kitchen, washed it, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard. I went to the front door, put on my coat, and drove home to the apartment I shared with the man my father had mistakenly described. That was the last meal I ever ate in that house. Janet called at 7:15 the next morning. I was at my desk reviewing a client's quarterly statements. Your dad didn't really mean it, she said. No, hi. No, how are you? Just checking the damage before coffee. He's worried about you, Sarah. Derek is nice. He really is. But he's not stable. I left it at that. Stability. My mother married a man who borrowed $40,000 from his parents and lost almost everything in the first year. She nearly went bankrupt for 2 decades because of one bad quarter. Stability was a word she used as a shield. She withheld it from everyone so she wouldn't have to think about her options. I told her I appreciated her concern. Is there something else? Don't act like this. We're family, so treat me like one. She had no answer. She hung up and sat in silence for a long time. That's what I realized that morning as I sat at my desk with the Georgia sun filtering through the curtains. My father's rejection had nothing to do with Derek. Derek was just a pretext. The real problem was control. My father wanted the world to follow his plan, a stable job, a secure marriage, and guaranteed profits. I was with him for 8 years, managing his finances and risks. But the moment I chose something he didn't approve of, I went from an asset to a liability. And you don't invest in liabilities. My mother was different, but at the same time, she was like us. She gave up a nursing career to raise us. As I built my career, I became proof that her sacrifice was a choice. Vanessa, who married young, stood by them, needed them, and made Janet's choices seem inevitable. I made mine seem like a choice. They didn't punish me for choosing Derek. I was punished for proving they had a choice all along. Vanessa's engagement party was to be held at home 3 weeks later, 50 people, with catering provided. I helped organize it because that's what I do. I was problem-solving. I ordered flowers from Peyton's florist, coordinated the dishes from Wilson's BBQ, and printed the seating charts on my home printer at 11 p.m. the night before. It cost me $212 and 9 hours of work. No one asked me to do it, and no one was forced to. I arrived early, set the tables, hung the wreath, and decorated the champagne bottles. When the guests arrived, I immersed myself in the kitchen, as usual. I made sure the evening ran smoothly while everyone enjoyed themselves. Janet stood up to give a speech. She thanked everyone who had helped support Vanessa. She mentioned the caterer, the florist, and Bradley's parents who had come from Savannah. She didn't mention me. Then she said, "We can only express our grief for this family with a celebration." She looked at me as she said this, not with hatred, but perhaps with something worse. If only it were that obvious. If only I'd known where I was beforehand. Bradley joked about the nurse counting the numbers. Vanessa laughed. Richard laughed. Everyone in the room laughed. I stood in the kitchen I'd decorated, holding a glass of champagne I'd bought. Suddenly, something opened. Not a malfunction. It opened. Like a lock had been unlocked. I volunteered to disappear. Every flower I arranged, every bill I paid, Every spare hour I carved out, I was building a foundation for a family I wasn't a part of. That night, I drove home and did what I did best. I opened a blank spreadsheet and started adding numbers. Not their numbers, mine. Derek was sitting on the sofa polishing a piece of walnut wood when I came in. He knew it from the way I left my keys. He asked me, "How far?" I told him everything. The toasts, the exception, the laughter, the general rule of parties. He left it like sandpaper. Derek's family went bankrupt when he was 16. His father's business partner withdrew the operating account funds and disappeared to Arizona. They lost their home, their trucks, and their business. Everything but each other. Derek dropped out of high school, earned his high school equivalency certificate in the evenings, and spent the next decade working his way back, job after job. He understood financial betrayal the way a firefighter understands fire, not as a concept, but as a wound. He said, "Everything you need, but I want you to hear something. You're carrying their burdens for free. That's not what a family does. That's what employees do. Except employees get paid." I sat down next to him. I told him about my decision. First, I wrote a formal resignation letter from the accounting department at Henderson Tools. Not an email, but a letter, printed and signed. I'm a certified public accountant. I know how to close an account. Second, I'm done with the family obligations. No fights, no speeches, just done. Derek nodded. "Are you sure?" "I am." He picked up the walnut again and started polishing it. "Then we'll sort the rest out together." That's it. No grand gestures, no dramatic oaths, just a man with sawdust in his hands telling me he's not going anywhere. I wrote the letter that night. A formal letter, 3 paragraphs, effective immediately. I didn't slam the door shut. I simply stopped opening it. I delivered the letter myself to Henderson's hardware store on Tuesday morning. The bell above the door rang the same way it had since I was 10. Richard was behind the counter arranging nails in boxes. I placed the envelope on the glass. "What's this?" he asked. "My resignation from the accounting department, effective immediately. Everything is effective for this quarter." He opened it and read it. His face went from red and confused in about 4 seconds. "After everything we've done for you?" I had been waiting for that sentence. "What did you do for me, Dad? Specifically?" He opened his mouth, but didn't say a word. Because the answer, honestly, was that I did it for them. 8 years I'd been doing it, and my return on investment was a spot at the bottom of the list and a $100,000 lesson about where I stand. Janet called that night. I told him, "You're making a terrible mistake. When Derek leaves you with nothing, don't back down." I won't back down, and I said it with all my heart. I didn't block their numbers, I just stopped answering. But the calls kept coming, once a week, then once a month, then every 3 months, always with the same tone. I didn't hear a single apology. It was always a request disguised as anxiety. I let them fall. Cutting off contact wasn't punishment, it was a gaping wound. I was bleeding from a wound they kept pretending didn't exist, and the only way to heal was to stop standing in the place where they kept waiting for me. If you've ever had to let go of people who were supposed to be your support, you know that silence that follows the last phone call. It's not peace. Not yet. It's the first breath after submerging your head underwater. But what happened to the numbers changed everything. Follow along. Derek and I got married 3 months later in Bibb County Courthouse. The total cost was $1,847. I bought my dress at a secondhand shop on Cherry Street. Ivory lace, a little long, but perfect. Derek was wearing his only suit and a tie that his mentor, Walt, had tied for him in the parking lot. Our witnesses were my college friend Emma and Walt, a retired contractor who had taught Derek everything about retaining walls and clean plaster. We had lunch at Hernandez's Diner on Forsyth Street, a fried chicken steak and sweet tea. Derek carved our initials into the wooden bench with a pocket knife while the waitress pretended not to notice. That same week, Derek bought a 3-bedroom house on Jeffersonville Street after failing to pay for it. The purchase price was $62,000. Cracked floors, rotting porch posts, and a kitchen that smelled of damp carpets and regret. Derek looked at him like a surgeon looks at a patient, and he already saw what it might be like. Our plan was simple. He would handle the renovation, and I would manage the finances. The first changes. I prepared the spreadsheet that night. Cost projections, timelines, and comparable sales within a 5-mile radius. Derek sketched the renovation plan on graph paper on the kitchen table, while I did the calculations on my laptop. I told him, "There are other couples registering to immigrate to China." He smiled. We registered for a circular saw and a business license. 4 months later, we sold that house for $131,000, making a profit of $41,000. That was our first return on investment. I filed a capital gains tax return. Derek was already looking for the next property. That's how the partnership that would officially change our lives began. Vanessa's wedding was on a Saturday in September. I wasn't invited. Emma was. She called me afterward, choosing her words carefully, like she would when describing someone else's party to an uninvited guest. The venue was on the shores of Lake Sinclair. There were 214 guests. A live band was flown in from Nashville. The orchids in the waiting room had wilted because no one had considered Georgia's humidity. Final cost, $87,000. My father raised a toast to investing in the future, and I think he believed in it. Meanwhile, Derek and I were finalizing our second deal, a brick house on Poinsettia Street. Purchase price, $71,000. Renovation cost, $34,000. Selling price, $158,000. Profit, $53,000. My sister spent $100,000 in one night, while Derek and I made $53,000 in 8 weeks. I didn't keep accounts, but I'm an accountant. The numbers are in my head, whether I say them or not. Emma mentioned something else. Bradley rented a brand new BMW a week before the wedding. To keep up with the excitement, he told the waiting party, $740. He laughed sarcastically, a month for a car he doesn't own, to impress people he'll forget by Christmas. I didn't pass judgment. I simply categorize them, as I categorize everything, according to patterns that are likely to complement each other. Derek and I spent that Saturday in September not at a wedding, but at a Warner Robins clearance auction. We lost the auction by $2,000, went home, ate the rest of the chili soup, and went to bed early. The hardware store was already doing well back then, but nobody told me, and I didn't ask. 7 months after I left Henderson's Hardware, my mom's number popped up on my phone. I was sitting in my car outside a property inspection site, eating a piece of granola and reviewing a contractor's quote. I answered, "I don't know why. Maybe it was just habit, or the ghost of a girl who still longs for her mother to speak the right words to her." Janet didn't greet her. "Your father is struggling," she said. "He can't do the balance sheet on his own. And the new accountant made some mistakes on the quarterly tax return. The IRS is asking questions. We could get fined." I waited. I counted the seconds in my head. 3, 5, 8. "No, how are you? No, we miss you. No, I'm sorry about what happened." My mother called me suddenly, as I later told Derek, just like when water leaks. "I hope you find someone to help you. I'm unavailable," I said on the phone. Silence. Then, "Are you really going to let your family fight over dignity?" "It's not dignity, Mom. It's boundaries." I turned off the phone. I put it on the passenger seat. I looked at the contractor's offer until the numbers stopped climbing. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt exhausted. 8 years of training don't vanish in 7 months. A wave of guilt ignited, sharp, familiar, habitual. My hands wanted to grab the laptop and open the QuickBooks file. Derek was waiting for me at home. He saw my face the moment I walked in. "They asked for your skills, not you," he said. He was right. The difference between the two is the difference between being a member of the family and being useful. I had confused the two for 8 years. The first year had passed, and I was doing the calculations in my usual way. After 3 rounds, the net profit was $127,000, including taxes, fees, and materials, plus a plumbing incident that taught Derek the importance of checking the main water line before demolition day. I filed the incorporation papers for Morrison Real Estate, LLC, on a Wednesday afternoon in March. Sarah Morrison. I got Derek's name, and when I saw it on the business license, I felt like I was planting a flag. Derek took charge of the design, construction, and managing the subcontractors. I handled finance, permits, accounting, tenant screening, insurance, and anything else that required a calculator and patience. We found a retired couple who were selling a small property management company. It had 6 rental units around Macon, mostly to on-time renters in Section 8 of the subsidized housing program, and all they wanted was a plumber to get the job done. The purchase price was $340,000, financed by a local credit union. I structured the deal so that it would generate cash from the first month. The calculations were straightforward. Derek built the houses, and I laid out the plans. Together, we built something neither of us could have built alone. That spring, we found the land. 5 acres just outside the city limits, rolling hills, and a cluster of ancient oak trees along the slopes, for $78,000. Derek walked along the property line and didn't say a word for 10 minutes. Then he said, "We're going to build our house here." I started keeping my personal records around that time. Not for work purposes, I was using QuickBooks for that. It was different. I reviewed Henderson Home Appliances files for 8 years, indexed my backups and data, and recorded every hour of work, every tax return, every supplier negotiation, every payroll cycle. I priced every job at market rate. I wasn't compiling a file. I was seeking clarity. 13 months after I stopped answering my parents' calls, Vanessa called. I was in the middle of a tenant investigation, background checks, credit reports, proof of employment, and paperwork. The type of work you do and who you allow in determines everything. I answered the phone because it was Vanessa's number, and she'd never called me before. Not once in 13 months. Sarah. Her voice was strained. My mom and dad are fighting all the time like it's a big deal. The store's in trouble. I waited for the question I needed to hear. How are you? How's Derek? How's life treating you? He didn't come. Dad hired an accountant from Craigslist. She messed up the payroll tax calculations. Something about misclassifying the part-time workers as independent contractors. And he owes the IRS $23,000 in penalties. $23,000. I could have done that in one sitting. Vanessa, I said, this sounds overwhelming. I hope Dad sorts it out. Silence. Then she fell silent again, her voice sharp. You can fix it. You know their system. You built their system. I can, I said. But I'm not anymore. She didn't ask me what I was doing now. She didn't ask about work or real estate or the life I'd built in the very city she still lived in and had never visited. My sister called me like one calls technical support. Ignore the kind words, describe the mistake, and expect a correction. You're selfish, she said. No, Vanessa, they're hiring me. The difference is, one of them is getting paid. I hung up, turned it off, and went back to reviewing the data. Some patterns were clear in the data. Vanessa had always treated me as a resource, not a sister. Resources aren't called to weddings. They're called in when there's a breakdown. I came across the number 1 Tuesday in October. I was tidying up my home office, the second bedroom that served as Morrison's Property Group's operations center, and I pulled my personal notebook from the filing cabinet. 47 pages, every entry dated, every hour recorded. I started this as an exercise in clarity, but what I discovered was quite different. 8 years of experience in accounting, preparing quarterly taxes, filing annual returns with the Georgia Department of Revenue, managing the payroll of 3 employees, reconciling supplier invoices, negotiating insurance renewals, tracking accounts receivable, and forecasting cash flows. I priced each service according to the prevailing rate of a certified public accountant in Central Georgia. Quarterly accounting, $12,000 annually. Tax preparation, $4,000. Payroll administration, $6,000. Supplier negotiations and cost savings. Variable, but I documented every dollar saved. This included overpaying a lumber supplier, renegotiating insurance, and restructuring an equipment lease in the fifth year, which saved them $1,800 annually. The total was at the bottom of page 47, $247,300. That's what 8 years of unpaid work looks like when you finally read the bill. I stared at the number for a long time. My parents gave Vanessa $100,000 for her wedding. They told me I didn't deserve any help. Meanwhile, I was contributing $250,000 to their family's expenses. I closed the register, put it back in the filing cabinet, and didn't publish anything about it or contact anyone. I told Derek that night. He saw the number and looked at me. "You were running their business for free, Sarah," he said, "and they said you didn't deserve help." I know, but it's not about what they owe me. It's about what I owe myself. I never used that record as a weapon. There was no need. Something changed after I found that number. Not overnight, but more like the foundations of a house gradually solidifying, forever, until one morning you realize the house has changed. I stopped trembling when the area code 478 appeared on my phone. I stopped driving down Riverside Road just to avoid Main Street and the Henderson hardware store sign. I stopped repeating my father's words at 3 a.m. when the house was quiet and my mind was racing. $247,000. That amount set me free. Not because I would use it, but because I finally had proof of what I had always felt, but couldn't put into words. I wasn't the girl who didn't deserve help. I was the girl who always helped. Business continued to grow. That month, Morrison Real Estate closed its sixth project, a craftsman-style cottage on College Street, which Derek had transformed from a dilapidated ruin into a 3-bedroom architectural gem. We now managed 12 rental units, generating $380,000 in annual revenue. I hired our first employee, a part-time property inspector named Glenn, who reminded me of Walt. Derek and I started building our house in November. He spent 4 months designing it, a modern cottage, a surrounding porch, and reclaimed timber beams from houses we'd pulled up. Oak from a farm in Jeffersonville, pine from a bungalow on College Street, and walnut from a duplex in East Macon. Each plank has a story. Derek would often repeat them. Every sign has a story. Just like us. The frame was installed before Christmas. I stood on the unfinished porch, watching the winter sunset behind the oak trees. I was building, not to prove anyone wrong, not to argue, just to prove I was right. 247,000. That was the number that changed everything. Not because Sarah used it, but because she finally saw its true value clearly. If you've ever wondered if anyone noticed what you've accomplished, then follow along. Because what happened when the person in charge left is the part you need to hear. In my second year, math stopped being impressive and started becoming an undeniable reality. 8 courses completed. Average profit per sale, $42,000. Total sales revenue, $336,000 before taxes. 12 rental units, generating $8,400 per month in net cash flow. 3 commercial renovation contracts signed, a dental clinic in Fineville, a barbershop on Broadway, and a co-working space in the Old Cotton Warehouse District. Morrison Real Estate Group's net worth exceeded $1 billion. $2 million. No family money, no inheritance, no investor. Just the discipline of an accountant and the determination of a carpenter not to cut corners. The house began to take shape on the hill. The structure was complete. The roof was raised, and the electrical work finished. Derek installed the windows himself. He found a supplier in Vidalia who sold triple-glazed windows at the contractor's price. I spent my evenings on the plywood floor of what would become our balcony, balancing my laptop on a saw and sorting through invoices while Derek worked at the table saw in the workshop behind us. When I was 24, I told him one night, I thought helping my family for free was an investment. It turned out that the best investment I ever made was in a man with dirty hands and a clear conscience. He didn't look up from the base he was working on. You're the one who made the numbers work. We made it work together. The community took notice. We hired local contractors, sourced materials from local suppliers, and sponsored the Macon Youth Football League. We were building something tangible. The community fundraiser, the city's largest annual event, would be held in the spring. Morrison Property Group was already on the guest list. I'd heard about the store, as is often the case in small towns, from someone who knew someone else who'd seen the signs. Our insurance agent, Judy Clemens, mentioned it during a policy review. Henderson Hardware is behind on its premiums. I had to send out a cancellation notice last month. She didn't know I was from the Henderson family. I'd worked at Morrison's for 2 years. I didn't help her. I made a few calls, secret calls. A supplier I'd known from my days as an accountant confirmed it. The store was in trouble. The replacement accountant, hired from Craigslist for $45,000 a year, was only making the payroll tax mess worse. Quarterly payments were delayed, suppliers were invoiced incorrectly, and 2 suppliers were double paid. The total damages over 18 months amounted to $67,000 in fines and overpayments. Richard's condition was exacerbated by a slipped disc. He couldn't leave the store for up to 4 hours a day, spending most of his time sitting in a chair behind the register, in pain. Janet, 58, was working full-time at the store for the first time in 20 years. She looked exhausted whenever someone mentioned her to me. What about Vanessa? Bradley? They're both so busy. Bradley's commissions went toward car payments and minimum credit card payments. Vanessa helped by posting pictures of the store's products on Instagram, and she only has 12 followers, with no sales. I wrote about this in my resignation letter, in paragraph 3. Without ongoing financial oversight, supplier relationships and tax compliance will deteriorate within 12 to 18 months. I didn't write this to be harsh. I wrote it because I'm an accountant. Predicting risks is my job. Every number I predicted came true. The store was losing money exactly as the sign said, and the person who could have stopped the loss was sitting on a hilltop outside the city building, a house with the man they said was incompetent. Richard arrived at our office on Thursday afternoon. Morrison Property was operating from a refurbished shop on 2nd Street. Glass storefront, clean signage, and 3 offices inside. I was reviewing a change order for a contractor when the doorbell rang and my father walked in. It was the first time I had seen him in 22 months. He was weaker, walking with a cane. His injury had worsened enough to require it, but his jaw remained unshaken. The jaw that assured him he was right, that the whole world would eventually agree with him. He glanced around the office, his business license hung on the wall, the property listings on the bulletin board. Glenn sat at his desk, managing similar property sales. Richard said, "You need to come back and help me with the books." He didn't say hello. Family helps family. I sat down. Family attends each other's weddings, Dad. He blinked. Whatever script he'd rehearsed in the car, that sentence wasn't in it. This was different. We were trying to protect you from what? I gestured toward the office, the glass walls, the tidy desks, the visible staff behind me. Whose building is this? He stood there. The cane trembled slightly. I couldn't tell if it was from anger or from the pinch. I didn't come here to fight. I came because we needed help. I said, I needed help too. 3 years ago you looked at me and said. I stopped. I didn't repeat the words. I didn't need to. The words echoed in the room, louder than any of us. He turned and left. The bell rang again. Glenn looked at me and asked, "Is everything all right?" I replied, "Yes." He came for my skills, not for me. I took the shift order and returned to work. Some columns were not matching. He closed the account and moved on to the next step. Vanessa and Bradley had broken up 22 months after the orchids had withered. I haven't heard from her. Emma contacted me, who in turn contacted me through a mutual friend, who in turn contacted Vanessa's hairdresser. Small towns have faster data speeds than fiber optics. Details came in fragmented. Bradley's spending increased after the wedding. He leased a BMW for $740 a month. Weekend trips to Hilton Head were on installment plans. A $15,000 BMW watch, $43,000 in credit card debt. The dealer cut his business in half after a bad quarter. The BMW came back. The watch went to a pawn shop on Eisenhower Avenue. Vanessa moved back into her parents' house. The nursery had lavender walls and a sunset poster she'd bought at TJ Maxx when she was 17. At 29, she lies in a single bed, scrolling through her wedding photos on her phone. My parents invested $100,000 in my sister's future. 22 months later, that future was folded into a garment bag in a closet, relegated to the category of lessons learned. I felt no joy. I was surprised. I expected some kind of justification, some pain, or at least a touch of elation. Instead, I felt something closer to realization. Vanessa wasn't my enemy. She was a product of the very system that was trying to devour me. The difference was that she had allowed it. The safe investment my father had chosen for me had failed. The risky gamble the carpenter and the accountant had taken, building a house on a hill, had failed. I didn't call Vanessa. I didn't send her a message. I just kept building. The best response to those who underestimated you isn't revenge, it's getting a permit, laying the foundation, and 12 months of hard work. Our house was finished in March. I remember that particular day because Derek walked me to the doorstep. My head hit the door frame, and we laughed so hard we ended up sitting on the porch steps eating cold pizza at sunset. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2,800 square feet on 5 acres. A modern cottage, the kind of house that looks generations old, even though every nail is new. Reclaimed wood beams in the living room. Oak from our first day working on Jeffersonville Road. Handcrafted kitchen cabinets built by Derek over 3 weekends, sanded until the wood grain gleamed like river pebbles. Derek's stone fireplace was built using stones we collected from our land. The porch surrounding the house is spacious enough for a table and 10 chairs, plus the rocking chair Walt gave us for moving into our new home. The estimated value of the house is $2.1 million. The land cost $78,000. The construction cost was $410,000. The calculations differ when the husband does 60% of the work. The prime location, the exceptional craftsmanship, and the expansive 5 acres in the Georgia hills all contributed to closing the deal. One morning, before Derek woke up, I wandered around the kitchen alone. I ran my hand over the countertop he'd installed. It was a recycled chopping board from a bowling alley in Milledgeville. Every surface in this house has been touched by his hands. Every paycheck at our company was mine. My parents said Derek didn't have a real career. They were wrong about many things, but this one thing bothered me the most. Being in a house where they were proven wrong without a word of protest. At the end of that week, we hosted our first dinner party. Emma, Walt, Glenn, 2 of our subcontractors, and their wives. 12 chairs around the table. I built a dining room that seats 12. My parents had a dining room with a bench that they didn't allocate for me. Macon has a population of 155,000, but the important neighborhoods are small. Church headquarters, PTA meetings, the cash register at Henderson's hardware store, or what's left of it. Word got around. The Morrisons built a house outside of town. A large store. Up the hill across the country road. Derek Morrison, the carpenter everyone called Broke Boy, and his wife Sarah. Sarah Henderson. Wait, Henderson? You like hardware stores? Like Richard and Janet Henderson, people started tying the strings. The Morrison Estate Group was prominent, employing local contractors, sponsoring youth sports, and sourcing materials from suppliers across the county. The store's name was plastered across billboards and sponsorship banners at football stadiums. Meanwhile, Henderson's hardware store seemed to be slowly recovering. Its stock was dwindling. The shelves that once held every nail and bracket in central Georgia were now empty, with stark gaps where products should have been. Richard was absent most days. A sign reading, "Help Needed," hung in the window for 3 months. Customers began to flock to the Home Depot in Warner Robins. And at Macon First Baptist Church, where the Henderson family had sat in the 3rd row for 2 decades, Janet's church friends began asking questions. "How's Sarah? We heard she built that lovely place on the hill." Janet's reaction was always the same, a faint smile, then a quick change of subject, steering the conversation toward selling baked goods at the church. Our neighbor, Mrs. Talbot, a retired teacher we'd known since kindergarten, said bluntly, "Janet, you should be proud of Sarah. She built everything herself from scratch." Janet's face fell in an expression that was anything but a smile. She excused herself to go to the bathroom and didn't return for 15 minutes. My mother had spent 30 years building her reputation as the perfect homemaker. My absence was the spark that ignited the flame. Janet called me one Sunday evening, for the first time in over a year. My heart skipped a beat at the caller ID, just as it used to, back when I still hoped every call would begin with, "I'm sorry." "People are talking," she said softly. "They think we abandoned you." "You didn't abandon me, Mom," I said. "You just chose someone else." She was silent. Then she said, "That's not fair, Sarah. We were worried about Derek, and we wanted what was best for you. It was better for me to be seen, appreciated, to be part of the community. You said you could only speak your mind at parties." The word spread. I heard him sigh, the voice of someone who understands his words, reflected back precisely. "We didn't mean what you meant, and I've built my life on that truth." She'd changed her style. The change was seamless. She'd been publishing stories for 30 years. Vanessa was having a hard time. Bradley had left her burdened with all this guilt. She needed her sister now more than ever. I told her that Vanessa had her own family. You'd made that abundantly clear at the engagement party. The call ended. I put the phone down on the kitchen table, the wooden butcher's table Derek had installed, and stared out the window at the oak trees. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because I'd cried before. For years. I cried silently in the car after family dinner. I cried silently in the shower after being ignored. I cried at my desk after reviewing numbers that confirmed what I already knew. There's a difference between crying for your family and crying over the very idea of them. I had given up on the idea long ago. The Macon Community Fundraiser was the biggest social event of the year. A joyous party at the Civic Center to support the local food bank and youth programs. White tables, a silent auction, 200 guests from all corners of the community, teachers, business owners, city council members, church deacons, and every family that had a role in this town. Linda Prescott, the event organizer, contacted me in February. "The Morrison Real Estate Group has done so much for the city of Macon this year," she said. "We're honored to have you and Derek as our title sponsors." I agreed immediately, not to boast, but because I cared about the community I'd chosen to build in. Derek and I had sponsored a youth baseball league, engaged local contractors, and partnered with Habitat for Humanity on a restoration project. This wasn't just a show, it was an expression of who we were. Henderson Hardware had sponsored the charity event for 15 years. This year, they could barely afford table tickets. The news reached Janet. Sarah and Derek Morrison were the headline sponsors. Janet told Richard, who stared at the floor. Vanessa, who was at home still working to pay off Bradley's debts, found out via Instagram. "She's going to brag about it," Vanessa told Janet. "She's doing this to humiliate us." I overheard this later in the polite banter that governs small-town life. It didn't surprise me. When you're in the spotlight your whole life, other people's successes seem to shine a light on your own shortcomings. My family thought my success was because of them, but it wasn't. Even so, I understood why they thought that. The fundraising gala was in 3 weeks. My parents, my sister, and I would be in the same room for the first time in 3 years. I ironed the dress and didn't think about it again until evening. 2 weeks before the gala, Vanessa drove past our house. She was delivering a store order, a special order of cabinetry for a customer across the county. The route ran alongside the driveway, separating our house from the customers. I wasn't home. Derek was in his workshop cutting tires for a customer's bathroom renovation. He heard a car slow down and then stop. He looked and saw a silver Honda parked at the end of our driveway, its engine running. There was a woman inside, gripping the steering wheel. Then her phone rang and she started crying. Derek didn't recognize her. He went back to work. She told me what happened that night, and I knew. I said, "It's Vanessa." He stopped. "Did your sister come by car?" "She was making deliveries. The road runs right in front of us." I imagined what she saw. The house rises on the hillside, with its whitewashed wooden walls, dark windows, 3-sided veranda, landscaped gardens planted with the help of a client's wife, a workshop, and a gravel driveway lined with magnolia trees we relocated from a demolition site in East Macon. All of it was built by our own hands and according to our own planning. My sister built it, the one who married the wrong person. The carpenter who had no real profession built it. $2. $1 million in futures contracts that my father refused to finance. Emma called me later that night. Vanessa called your mother, crying. She kept asking, how did she get this? How did Sarah get a house like that? Janet didn't answer because the answer was the kind of calculation even she couldn't solve. Sarah got the job because she's Sarah, and you fired her. The fundraiser was in 14 days. The three of them, clears their voice, decided to attend. Macon Civic Center on a warm April evening. White tablecloths, magnolia blossoms adorning the tables, a silent auction by the east wall. 200 guests streamed through the double doors. This is the kind of occasion where everyone gets to know each other, and the seating chart is a political document. Derek and I arrived at 6:30. I was wearing a simple dark blue dress with no labels. Derek was wearing his only decent jacket and a tie I'd bought him at the second-hand shop where I'd found my wedding dress. He was adjusting his collar every 30 seconds. My parents were already there. At table 14, near the far end. Richard was wearing an even looser suit jacket than before. Janet had her composed smile, the smile that seemed to hide everything. Vanessa was next to them, wearing a dress I recognized from the store where she used to work. Employee discount. It still had the brand's signature fold at the neck. The room noticed us, as rooms do when two halves of a familiar story meet in one place. Whispers, glances, a polite dance of people taking sides while pretending otherwise. I found our table, table 3, near the podium, the patron's introduction. We sat down. Derek squeezed my hand under the tablecloth. Vanessa caught up with me 10 minutes later at the refreshment table. Good for you for coming to a place you weren't supposed to be, she said. You were so quiet I was the only one who heard you. They invited me, Vanessa, I said. They asked me to be a sponsor. You're only here to embarrass us. I was looking at my sister. She's 29. She lives in our parents' house. Overwhelmed by guilt toward her ex-husband, she wore a dress from a job she no longer had. I'm here because I believe in this community, I said. Just as I believed in our family, until our family made it clear that the feeling wasn't mutual. Linda Prescott took the stage at 7:15 and thanked the volunteers, donors, and committee members. Then she spoke about the sponsors. Adjusting the microphone, she said, this year's headline sponsor is a couple who embody everything this charity event stands for. They came to Macon with nothing but a business plan and a set of hand tools. Within 3 years, they transformed 8 homes, created jobs for 12 local workers, and built one of the most respected real estate companies in Central Georgia. I ask you to join me in thanking Derek and Sarah Morrison of Morrison Property Group. The turnout was huge, 200 people, including teachers who taught me in high school, business owners who saw our signs in their workplaces, and church members who had seen the Henderson family sitting in the 3rd grade for 20 years, stood and applauded the girl they had been told did not deserve help. I stood up, nodded, and sat back down. Derek did the same. No words, no greeting, just thanks. Across the room my family sat. Richard stared at his plate, his neck muscles tense. Janet's smile was stiff, an expression you had to fight with every muscle in your face. Vanessa's eyes were shining. She wiped away the traces with a paper napkin she was rubbing. Throughout dinner, people came to our table, not continuously, but continuously. We are so happy that you and Derek have joined this community. Your renovations on Broadway are fantastic. My son applied for a job at your company. He said it was the most professional interview he's ever had. Every compliment was recorded in a register that I would never need to show to anyone. Table 14, at Henderson's, remained silent. Not because people were cruel, but because they notice who builds and who tears down. 200 people saw me. Richard found me during the silent auction. The crowd spread out on the east side, vying for gift baskets and weekend getaways. I was reading a description of a framed watercolor of the Ocmulgee River when he appeared beside me. He smelled of aftershave and something else. A dull, sharp scent, like a man working under the pressure of adrenaline and lack of sleep. He said, "You've made your point." His voice was low and quiet, the same voice he used when negotiating with suppliers. "Don't make us look bad." I didn't turn to look at him. I continued reading the painting's description. "I'm not making you look bad, Dad. I'm living my life. Give this money to your sister. She desperately needed it. You didn't have your skills." I turned around then. I looked at him. He really did. He was 61 years old. His back ached. His body was dying. His favorite daughter's marriage had failed. He had stood before the girl who had dumped him and asked her to shrink so he could feel tall. I said, "I needed that too. Maybe not money, but conviction, confidence, the same confidence you gave Vanessa without hesitation." "What did I try to protect you from? From building a $2 million company? From hiring 12 people? From standing in this room as the headline sponsor of the fundraising gala I once sponsored?" He opened and closed his mouth. He had no prepared text. For 30 years, his authority had been the final word in every conversation. Now he was facing someone who outnumbered him, outshone him, and whose voice was much quieter. He turned and went back to table 14. Janet watched him sit down. Vanessa watched him look at the tablecloth. Everyone in the room was watching everything. 8 minutes later, I was back at my table talking to Derek about whether he wanted to bid on the watercolor when everyone moved on. That distinctive silence. The silence that descends upon a large crowd when a private secret is about to be revealed. Janet approached us. Not quickly, but deliberately. Her heels tapped on the floor of the city center like a rhythmic beat. She stopped a foot away from our table, so close that I could see the eyeshadow beginning to drip into the corners of her eyes. "You're punishing us." Her voice was loud enough for everyone around us to hear. Then it grew even louder. "You built this whole life just to show it off to us. You flaunt your house and your job to humiliate us." I stood up, slowly. "The way you stand when someone wants to see you doesn't sound like you're afraid. Mother, I didn't build my life to punish you. I built it because you told me I was alone, so I went it alone. We sacrificed everything for this family." Janet's voice trembled. "I gave up my career. Your father sacrificed his health for that store, and you simply walked away. You sacrificed for the family you chose," I said. "I wasn't part of that family." She told me that at Vanessa's engagement party. She told me that when Dad said those words at the dinner table. "You don't have to be angry that I heard you." Vanessa was behind Janet now. She paced the room unconsciously, drawn in by the seriousness of the situation. She said, "You always had to be better than everyone else. You always had to prove something." I looked at my sister. "I didn't have to be better, Vanessa. I just had to live without you." Silence fell over the hall. 200 people were watching a family unravel before their eyes. The dishes remained untouched. Conversation ceased. All eyes in the Macon Civic Center were fixed on a mother and her 2 daughters, and on 30 years of buried inequality finally surfacing. Richard didn't get up, nor did he go toward him. He sat at table 14 with his arms folded, staring at the tablecloth as if reading a sentence he already knew. Janet's voice broke as she said, "I don't know what it's like to see your daughter leave." I said, "You're right. I don't know what it's like to see a daughter leave. I know exactly what it's like to be the girl who had to do that." I sat down. Derek held my hand. I didn't leave. I didn't rush out. I didn't fire a farewell shot. I went back to my seat, to my dinner, to my life. The confrontation was over. Not because I'd won, but because there was nothing left to prove. The Hendersons left at 8:45. Janet entered first, walking briskly toward the exit, her handbag pressed against her chest. Vanessa followed, her head bowed. Richard entered last, moving slowly, leaning on his cane, and paused at the double door for one last look around the hall before entering the parking garage. The ceremony continued. The band played, the silent auction concluded. People began to arrive at my table one by one. My former neighbor, Mrs. Talbot, a retired teacher who had taught Vanessa and me, sat in the empty chair next to me. "We always wondered why you'd stopped coming," she said. "Now we understand." The church deacon, Harold, shook Derek's hand, saying, "Your mother-in-law told everyone that Sarah had gone to work. We didn't know the truth." I touched the arm of a woman I barely knew, who turned out to be my ninth-grade English teacher. "I taught both of you. I always knew you were determined. I'm sorry I didn't say so when it mattered." I thanked them both. I said it confidently each time. Outside, in the parking lot, Richard sat alone in his van. Janet and Vanessa were driving home. He gripped the steering wheel the same way Derek said Vanessa had gripped it 2 weeks earlier, when she parked in front of our house. Different grip, but the same tension. He whispered something. I'll never know exactly what, but Emma's husband, who was parked 2 rows away, heard bits of it through the open window. I tried to protect him. He believed that, and he always will. But as he sat alone in that yard, calling out to his daughter, the one he said didn't deserve help, Richard Henderson realized for the first time that intentions are worthless when the damage has already been done. He started the engine and drove home alone. The party ended at 10 o'clock. Derek and I were the last patrons to leave. We stayed behind to help Linda's team gather the chairs and dismantle the auction tables. Old habits die hard. The parking lot was almost empty. The April air was warm and humid. Cicadas chirped in the row of trees. Janet stood by the exit. I don't know how long she'd been there. She finished applying her mascara. She washed her hair in the bathroom, but her eyes were puffy, and she stood there like someone who's been practicing something for an hour and is still unsure if they can pronounce the words correctly. She said, "Come over for dinner on Sunday. We can try to work this out. We can go back to being a family like we used to be." I saw my mother, the woman who erased my name from the greeting, who told me she could only open her heart at parties, who called me when the books broke but never when my birthday came, who told church friends for 3 years that I was leaving for work. I loved her, and I always will. But love and access are 2 different versions. "I'm home, Mom," I said. "I've been home for 3 years. You never came to visit." Her face fell. "I didn't know where you lived," she said. "You didn't ask." We stood there for a moment. 2 women separated by a 30-foot concrete wall and 3 years of irreversible choices. Then, Derek took my hand and we walked toward the truck. That night, I didn't lock the door for my mother. I stopped pretending it was open. The engine started. The car's headlights swept across the parking lot, and I caught Janet, who was still standing by the exit, her arms wrapped around her. Derek sped off down the country road. The chirping of crickets filled the silence. I watched him in the side mirror as the town center shrank until it disappeared. The consequences came as compounded benefits do, quietly at first, then all at once. Henderson's hardware store was put up for sale 4 weeks after the fundraising campaign. 22 years of nails and brackets, and my father's pride and joy, were listed for sale by a commercial real estate agent on Cherry Street. A regional chain of stores bought the space for $160,800 less than the building's value. Richard signed the papers without any ceremony at a real estate office. No toasts, no talk of future investments, just a pen, a notary, and the end of an inheritance I'd held for 8 years without a word of thanks. Vanessa moved to Atlanta in June, got a job at Home Goods and a registered job. She was earning $50 an hour and living in a small apartment in Decatur with a girl she'd met on a housemate app. At 29, she was recovering from $43,000 in debt, left to her by her ex-husband as a parting gift, and had a terrible credit history. Janet sat alone in the 3rd row at Macon First Baptist Church the following Sunday. Richard didn't attend. His back pain had worsened to the point where he needed a referral to a surgeon in Atlanta, and the commute was too long on a Sunday. The church friends who envied the Hendersons, the stable boy, the beautiful girl, and the young businessman stayed away from Janet after the service. Not out of cruelty, but because of the strange awkwardness that comes with knowing everyone knows the story and no one knows what to say. 3 years of my silence cost my family their shop, their reputation, and the narrative they had built around themselves. I didn't cause any of this. I simply stopped trying to prevent it. There's a difference between revenge and withdrawal. Revenge drains energy, while withdrawal is simply accepting reality. My life continued like solid things do, stable, efficient, and improving with time. By autumn, Morrison Group had 25 leased properties and 8 full-time employees. Projected revenue is $1.4 million. Derek was designing a community workshop for veterans. Free woodworking and home improvement classes, funded by our company, are held in the warehouse we renovated on Broadway. I planted a vegetable garden behind the house: tomatoes, butternut squash, basil, and sugar peas on a trellis. Derek did welding with recycled rebar. In the morning, I sat on the porch, sipping my coffee and watching the mist rise from the hills. The oak trees were taller than when we bought the land, or perhaps I was simply more observant. I didn't post on social media, I didn't give interviews, and I didn't drive past the building that used to be Henderson's hardware store. It was now a convenience store, with fluorescent signs and a parking lot where the gardening department used to be. A letter arrived on a Tuesday in October. A plain white envelope. In my father's handwriting. I would have easily recognized it after 8 years of reading his notes in the margins of suppliers' invoices. I opened it standing by the mailbox, the warm afternoon sun on my shoulders. I was wrong. That was all. No explanation, no context, no request, no condition, no return address, even though I knew perfectly well where he lived. That was it. Blue ink on a folded sheet of notebook paper. I read it twice. I studied it. I sat with it on the kitchen table for a long time, running my thumb along its folds. Then I put it in the filing cabinet. The same drawer that held the ledger. The same drawer that held the life I had counted and left behind. My father's forgiveness was nothing I owed him. This was something I would give myself when I was ready. And I wasn't ready yet. Some accounts take longer to settle than others, and some balances never close completely. The people who told me I didn't deserve help gave me the greatest gift they could give. The confirmation that everything I built, every wall, every number, every morning on this balcony, was mine. This place was built by my hands and the hands of the man who claimed it wasn't enough. $100,000 for a marriage that lasted 22 months. $250,000 of unpaid work that no one would accept. A $2 million house built by a carpenter and with the determination of an accountant. And a family who realized too late that the one who evicted them was the one who really held all the power. If you've ever been the one ignored, the one told you didn't deserve a seat at the table, you know that feeling all too well. You know the silence that follows when you stop trying. And you know how your life gets louder while theirs gets quieter. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Comment if you've ever had to build your own table because they wouldn't give you a chair. Subscribe to Quiet Drama Stories because every story here is about those who stayed behind.